Good morning. This session was described as about the link between subjective well-being and objective inequality. And the sort of slight suggestion that there was this tension between the subjective and the objective. And I think what I suspect what we will all be trying to show, but certainly I will be trying to show, is that subjective measurement of those things that make life worthwhile, as Cormac was saying, subjective measurement is a vital tool for deciding what to do about objective conditions, including objective inequality. So, we'll begin with a number, 4.4%. I won't explain the significance of that number, just to say that we'll come back to it. So, the basic subject of this presentation, the argument follows the following lines. Redistribution, more equality, is good for well-being. Growth is also sometimes, not always, sometimes good for well-being. And if redistribution reduces growth, and people argue that it does, then how much growth is it worth sacrificing to get it? If there are two things that produce well-being, how much of each should we have? What's the trade-off? Because that's a question that we haven't perhaps addressed as rigorously as we should. So, the question actually has been asked for quite a long time. It's a standard part of standard economic theory that there is an optimal level of inequality in an economy. And this is because of the well-known assumption of the declining marginal utility of income. A pound is worth less to a millionaire than to someone on 10,000 a year. Therefore, other things being equal, utility is maximised when incomes are equal. That's the standard theory. But other things are not equal. Incentives are needed to stimulate the economy and make it grow. And a growing economy is needed to generate rising income and jobs. And rising income and enough jobs increase utility, hence the trade-off. There's an optimal level of inequality, where the marginal gain from incentives, i.e. growth, equals the marginal gain from redistribution. Everyone's known that for a very long time. But where is this optimal level? That's the problem. The numbers are disputed. And this creates space for the following bogus assumptions. We need to maximise GDP growth. There is no trade-off, we just maximise GDP growth. And the existing level of inequality is justified, since it's needed to achieve it. Now, no one actually says this explicitly, because it's absurd when you state it like that. But this is the sort of underlying assumption of a lot of the discussion in this area. The subjective well-being evidence helps to counter it. Principle, the subjective well-being evidence, we can say, this level of inequality is only justified if it produces that increase in GDP. Or, to put the same point the other way around, this level of redistribution is worth it, even if we have to lose that amount of GDP. Now, I emphasise that whether or not you will actually lose any GDP is also hotly disputed. I mean, I tend to think that if you look at the data of developed countries, there's actually, the more equal the society, the better the growth rate on the whole. So that side of the equation is not clear at all. But I'm going to leave that to one side. Other people perhaps today will talk about that. I'm just going to talk about the other side of the equation. Even if there is a trade-off there, even if you need inequality to boost GDP, how much would one sacrifice in order to get more equality? So, what the evidence tells us and doesn't tell us, the well-being evidence. It tells us about, there's an income effect basically, income, employment and social effects on well-being. And those are influenced by the level of growth and by the level of inequality. So, the evidence tells us about the impact of income on well-being. We can actually put some numbers on that declining marginal utility of income, and these are the figures from the UK Understanding Society survey. And basically, it's the pattern you would expect from that theory, broadly speaking. you can see that the extra 60,000, between 80,000 and 140,000, produces about as much well-being as an extra sort of 4,000 down at the bottom of the curve. So you can work out what the impact of inequality and growth is on well-being. If you increase the income of everybody, just going back to this, if you increase the income of everybody, what will that do? You can sort of work that out. And if you actually redistribute from the top to the bottom, you can work that out too. So inequality, levels of growth, that will give you the level of income in each decile, and from there you can calculate the income impact on well-being. I won't go through this slide in detail, but it's just to point out that growth, unemployment and well-being are also related. The growth rate, these are based on UK figures, the growth rate will affect the level of employment. It's based upon what happened in the UK in 2008 and 13. That will affect, and then unemployment has an impact on well-being, both for those who are unemployed, of course, but also for the surrounding society. So the level of growth has an impact on the level of employment, and then there's the employment impact on well-being. And inequality has societal effects too. Some of you will have read Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, which suggests that inequality produces a range of health and social problems, and those too have an impact upon well-being. And I'm not going to include those in the little calculation I do today, because the problems vary by decile, and so we need to do a more sophisticated regression than I was able to do in the time. So we can use this evidence to answer some questions. Imagine, and do a little thought experiment. Imagine that half the difference between the income of the top 10% and the next 10% was redistributed to the bottom 30%. Very simple tax and benefit policy. What would the income effect on well-being be? i.e., what would the increase in well-being for the bottom 30% be, and what would the loss of well-being for the top 10% be? There would be an increase because of the declining marginal utility effects that I've already pointed out. How much damage to GDP would there have to be to cancel this out via both the income and the employment effects that I described? And is that level of damage a plausible level of damage? And if it isn't, perhaps we should do it. So if we exclude the social impacts, which I said I was excluding from the calculation because I haven't done all the analysis that's necessary, the answer is 4.4% once off. We did a quick calculation, and that's what the number is. Now, that's how much growth it's worth sacrificing to get that shift from the top 10% to the bottom 30% in well-being terms. Leaving aside any questions of social justice or anything like that, just if we're trying to maximise well-being. This number will be considerably higher if we'd done a number of things. If we'd included the social impacts, all that stuff about health and crime and so on and so forth that is affected by the level of inequality in society. We had not assumed, incorrectly, that the proceeds of growth are spread evenly across the population. In doing our calculation, we assumed that if the economy grows by a certain amount, everyone's income grows by that amount. In fact, as many of you will know, that's not been the case. The gains have all gone to the top. We assumed that for the purposes of the calculation. We also ignored some of the controls in the assessing income effects, which means that it looks as if the benefits are lower than they are. So those controls, I think. And perhaps most importantly, we are simply assuming the money is transferred as cash benefit. In fact, it would be much, much more well-being efficient to use that money to spend on on public expenditure, which has a much higher impact on well-being than simply increasing people's income. So, for example, steps to reduce unemployment, public health measures, support for the disabled, housing policy, and so on and so on and so on. There's a whole host of things which have a much higher impact on well-being than simple redistribution, but that's not what the question was. And also, we could have weighted the impacts on the least well-off more heavily than we have done for a number, both for social justice reasons and for reasons which I won't go into, but connected with something you might know about the Eastern paradox. Anyway, I won't go into that. Anyway, the overall point, that 4.4% is quite a conservative number. It should probably be quite a lot higher. So what does it mean? What it means is that it would be worth sacrificing at least 4.4%, probably much more, of GDP to achieve the redistribution that I described. If we sacrifice less than this, we're net gainers. So is it plausible that the level of redistribution described will reduce GDP in this way? No one can actually say definitely yes or no. The question is it plausible? I personally don't think it is, particularly if you add these extra effects on. Some people might say it is. It is plausible. And if it's not, can we do more? Can we continue? Is this a journey we can continue and do further redistribution in further years? Key point is that you don't have to accept the argument that addressing inequality is too damaging to do anything about.